Okay, good. So today I'm gonna speak, as Kostis mentioned, on the field of urban political ecology, and I'm gonna try and share my screen with you. And I hope this works. If it doesn't work, just let me know, because I can't hear your reactions at this moment. I want to spend some time to explain how and why the epistemologies, ontologies, and methodologies that have been developed in the field of urban political ecology matter when it comes to addressing the systematic social and political disaster we call climate change. And to do this, I will draw partially on the book we edited, just came out, with Roger Kyle, Tate Mandler, and Yanis Saninis, Turning Up the Heat, Urban Political Ecology for a Climate Emergency. First, let me give you a bit of a background, a bit of an archaeology of urban political ecology, because this is a mixed audience. And for those who are not aware of that history always matters. So urban political ecology is a field that emerged in the late 80s and 1990s with foundational texts authored by Neil Smith, William Cronon, Mike Davis, Eric Swingedow, Matthew Gandhi, Jean Desford, and Roger Kyle, Paul Robbins, Nick Heinen, and myself, amongst others. Now, what these texts did is they made an intervention to both urban studies and political ecology. Ontologically, urban political ecology, I will refer to it as UPE because it's quite long. So ontologically, UPE unsettled the traditional understanding of cities as distinct entities separate from the outside, from nature and from the periphery, by making two key claims. The first claim is that there is nothing unnatural about what we call cities. Everything we see around us in cities, bricks, steel, concrete, asphalt, are metabolized and engineered flows of natural resources put together by human labor, capital investment, and technology, and governed by power relations. And the second claim UP made is that there is nothing natural about a forest or a park. These are also the outcomes of historical layers of metabolic flows between geological processes, human and non-human labor, capital investment, and technology. So UP claimed that there is no city as such or nature as such, but there is a perpetual process which I call the urbanization of nature. So in close discussion with Donna Haraway and Bruno Latour, UP developed a new ontological understanding of both nature and the city as hybrids or cyborgs, neither purely human nor purely natural, socio-environmental, socio-technological constructs ridden by power relations. And this ontological shift matters because it also made an epistemological intervention to urban studies and political ecology. For urban studies, UP disrupted the canon that conceptualized cities as these bound, purely social spaces separated from the outside, but also from the non-human world. Think here of the Chicago School of Urban Sociology, and its depiction of the city as this bounded object that grows in specific ways that are all related to socioeconomic processes. With respect to political ecology, UP also urged to focus not only on extractive politics and distributive politics in the global south and north, but to focus instead on the dialectic between an increasingly urbanized and luxurious lifestyles in the north and the south, and the destruction of environment and livelihoods also in the global north and the global south. So UP examines how living in core urban centers is made possible only because it's possible to extract unlimited and underpaid power, energy, land, natural resources, labor at a global scale. It examines how core cities can afford to become smarter and cleaner only because they can dump their externalities elsewhere. Our increased sustainability and smartness and resilience, if you wish, is someone else's socio-environmental disaster. So in short, UP's epistemology examines climate change not as a kind of collateral damage, but as the very modus operandi of capitalist urbanization. And this ontological epistemological shift went hand in glove with 4 key methodological interventions. The first is a call to examine neither city or nature, as I mentioned, as such, but the urbanization of nature, not to examine things, but processes. The urbanization of nature is a set of metabolic flows, socioeconomical processes, and power relations that transform and hybridize environments, landscapes, but also humans and more than human species. Now, what does this mean for our research practice? It means that in order to understand urbanization, we need to look outside and underneath cities. We need to examine all those dams, tunnels, reservoirs, infrastructures that disrupt geological and biophysical processes in order to serve cities. Those infrastructures and processes that carry water, sewage, energy, food, all these things that urbanization needs. We need to examine the capital, labor, and technology input that makes these flows possible. But these engineered metabolic flows remain hidden underneath and outside cities, and even outside the cognitive map of urban residents. So our first task is to make these invisible flows visible. The second methodological intervention that UP made is the call to examine the urbanization of nature, not only as this metabolic process, but also as a violent process of creative destruction driven by conflict and power relations. There are other flows-based approaches and epistemologies, for example, urban ecology, industrial ecology, systems theory, etc. And these processes focus on quantitatively mapping flows of matter in and out of city, energy, air, waste, food, etc. And this is important and it matters, but UP claims that this is not enough. So UP calls to expand to qualitative and quantitative analysis of a dual metabolic circuit between, on one hand, cycles of economic investment and crisis, and on the other hand, cycles of socio-ecological transformation and destruction. And it is this relationship between these two circuits that lies at the heart of urbanization, and that also lies at the heart of what drives climate change. For example, if we think of the fires that burn each year from Greenland to Hawaii, from Australia to Greece, these fire ecologies are humanly constructed, of course. These fire ecologies are fed by and then feed into profit-driven urbanization practices. It's building where there should be no building, that overrides local ecologies and Holocene adaptations and pushes native ecosystems past their survival tipping points. And this invariably happens with public blessings and even subsidies. And in Greece, we have seen that repeatedly in tragic ways year after year with floods and fire disasters. So to understand the reasons why fierce fires and floods destroy entire landscapes and livelihoods year after year, we need to understand this dialectic between the dual metabolic circuit of economic investment and real estate investment and socio-ecological transformation. And this is what's at the core of UP's methodology. The third methodological intervention of UP makes is the assistance not only to look at this double circuit, but to historicize this double circuit, to analyze why and how these flows are embedded within deeply historical, geographical, political, social, and economic frameworks. Now, why does this matter? Take, for example, Amsterdam. This is where I work and live. And take, for example, Amsterdam and the massive housing crisis Amsterdam has been undergoing for years now, and it's exacerbated every year. There's lots of studies on Amsterdam housing and the housing crisis. And if we study this crisis under real estate economics or housing studies or planning, we try to explain how and why each multi-million real estate transaction over one of Amsterdam's canal houses is linked to housing crisis and increases marginalization practices. But when I examine Amsterdam's canal houses and the housing crisis under a UPE framework, I want to explain not only how and why each real estate transaction exacerbates housing inequality and crisis, but I also want to explain how and why each of these transactions also exacerbates environmental destruction. And to do this, it is not enough to look at aggregate real estate pricing data, or even global and local investment flows, or even institutional frameworks and household practices. To do this, to understand how housing, real estate speculation is linked to environmental destruction, I examine canal houses as sponges that have absorbed century upon century and layer upon layer the profit that has been extracted from exploited natural resources and bodies of men and women, not only locally in Amsterdam, but also in Suriname, Ghana, India, Angola, Senegal, South Africa, Indonesia, in ports, mines, oil rigs, breweries, cigarette and biscuit factories, windmills, tulip plantations around the world. All this exploitation and sweat ended up being piles of bricks along the canals of Amsterdam. And this didn't only happen in the past. Each time a new real estate transaction takes place in Amsterdam, fresh amounts of profit extracted from labor and resources across the world sinks once again into that particular pile of bricks that we call an Amsterdam canal house. And the profit made from this new real estate transaction is also feeding further luxurious lifestyles in the West and further consumerist practices and further expansive urbanization and real estate transactions. Finally, the fourth methodological intervention that UPE made is the claim to a type of scholarship that is neither conceived nor practiced as an insular academic exercise. UPE is interested not only into identifying problems, but also exploring alternative pathways to urbanization. For this way, UPE always puts forward as key question who wins and who loses out of any socio-environmental intervention. So today, UPE spans over 3 decades of cross-fertilization, but also self-criticism, constructive self-criticism, we hope. But also today, these hybrid ontologies that UPE suggested 3 years ago are more relevant than ever before. The dynamics of growth produce even more violent and more feral forms of urbanization and growth that blur further the boundaries between the inside and the outside and lead to new waves of destruction and inequality. So in the book, we identify 4 contemporary debates in UPE that have the potential to make a theoretical contribution, but also a political intervention to the current socio-environmental emergency. The first debate discusses new ontologies and epistemologies of urbanization. Over the past decades, new forms of urbanization emerged. Corridor urbanization, extensive suburbanization, employment zones, office cities, aerotropolises, infrastructure zones, logistics cities, desacotas. These are no longer some kind of hinterland serving a core. They're forms of urbanization that create new and layered dynamics of growth and decline, densification and de-densification. And of course, they promote new forms of inequality and marginalization. So in the book, we propose extended urbanization as a concept that can unify the field, but can also push us beyond the perceived ontological supremacy of the core. And people in this audience have done amazing work, Costis and Dina and Lois and others, about the core and periphery in the past. So this claim and this conceptualization links with that work, and it's to push beyond the perceived ontological supremacy of the core, but also to push us to theorize the urban and the environment, not from the core outside, but from its margins, whilst keeping attention to the core. and also can help us expand our understanding of marginality beyond the traditional notions, actors, and spaces. And this is not just an academic exercise, of course, it matters politically. Why it matters politically? Take, for example, when Berger depicted the US suburban fringe as no man's land in 2017. This depiction was not simply an academic representation. Accepting suburbia, US suburbia as no man's land means ignoring millennia of metabolic flows between humans and non-humans that produce these landscapes. It means ignoring generations of power struggles over land between indigenous and settlers. It means neglecting the history of power dynamics between state planning and private property regimes that normalized land grabbing. So there is no such thing as no man's land. And all the authors in the book write from this standpoint. For example, Roberto Luis Montemor and Esther Limonat research and speak from spaces that have been perceived as no man's land in the past, from spaces and economies that survived or emerged outside Brazil's core colonial industrial urbanization. And they find in those neglected spaces that there exists not only alternative economies, but also the potential to produce alternative socio-environmental imaginaries and futures for the core itself. The second debate the book brings to the fore is the call for a situated UP. And this comes from scholars working on and from the Global South, post-colonial feminist and intersectional scholars who see the possibility for a broader range of urban experiences to inform theory, but also it is a call to decenter the position from which research and theory itself is being produced and developed. So not just to bring into focus and document different ways of thinking across different territories, but also to give space for theory making and conceptualization that comes from different geographical locations. For example, Wangui Kimari, in her wonderful chapter in the book, discusses how Nairobi's colonial past shapes not only present urbanization practices, but also the very way people define themselves as political subjects in Nairobi. When European settlers chose the elevated mosquito-free areas for their own habitation, they left the low-lying floodplains to the natives. And today, these racialized geographies of the past are still the foundational map on which capital draws new exploitative practices. But also, they are the foundational map on which people define themselves still as political subjects. The third debate in the book examines the conceptual and methodological challenge and political implications of bringing the more than human life world into our agenda. Of course, most of UPE's foundational texts already focused on the flows of more than human matter, water in particular, but also air, waste, etc., to illustrate this messy continuity between city and nature. But in our book, the call is for UPE to engage further with science, with ecology, with medicine. For example, in the chapter by Kyle, Ali, and Treffers, the authors add infectious disease and zoonosis to UPE's analysis of metabolic explanations. And this was written actually before COVID. Today, it's even more important. So the authors examined the SARS, the Ebola, and later the COVID outbreaks, and they argued that the spatialized political ecology of infectious disease can help mitigate the impact of outbreaks and climate change in a continuously urbanizing world. And the final and fourth debate in the book addresses a very important political conundrum. While we scholars move beyond privileging cities as objects of inquiry, actually, policymakers increasingly make the city the preferred site for policy intervention. Cities are now expected to save the planet, to become more resilient, to become smarter. International organizations fund urban labs, promote techno-managerial solutions, promote circular economies, smart cities, etc. we argue that these technocratic urban risk management practices can lead to what Swingedal calls a depoliticization of key socio-environmental issues. But the chapters in the book also show that the very same technomanagerial solutions that we are critical of can actually become generative of new forms of policies and politics. Irina Veliku, in her chapter, explains how the technomanagerial policy that promoted a one-way future for Romania as an urban industrial state facilitated land grabbing and dispossessed the country's very large peasant population. But at the same time, this same technomanagerial practice generated new political consciousness, and a growing number of people came up and proclaimed themselves to be the new peasants, and they formed the eco-ruralis movement that became internationalized and challenges land grabbing and industrial scale food production. So which way do we move forward our academic practice and our politics? As I mentioned earlier, the book is a call not only to move the academic field, but also the politics of academia beyond apocalyptic scenarios. And at this moment, we do not have a coherent alternative that can take us beyond technomanagerial solutions or apocalyptic scenarios. But we do have on-the-ground practices and ideas suggesting alternative ways. Many of these draw their inspiration from Latin American discourses on buen vivir. They suggest replacing the imperial mode of living with what Brandon Vincent call a solidary mode of living. Solidary not only for the people of the global south, but also for those in the global north, whose lives are far from luxurious, and there are millions of those in the global north as well. Now, the problem is that when it comes to turning these imaginaries and ideas and localized practices into a programmatic agenda, we are at a complete stalemate. And this stalemate does not come only from the evil doings of capitalism. This stalemate comes from an important disagreement right inside the realm of progressive politics, politics in general and the politics of academia more specifically. It is a disagreement over the dilemma, A, should we save the planet by pulling the brakes on capitalist growth altogether, which is what degrowth suggests, or B, should we maintain a level of growth that can secure jobs and improve livelihoods in the global south and north, which is what socialist modernizers argue. I suggest that this is a false dilemma, and I will briefly outline 4 suggestions. We need to debunk it, so I will briefly outline 4 suggestions to start debunking it and moving beyond this dilemma and towards a progressive politics of solidary growth. The first suggestion is to take seriously Matthew Hubert's depiction of climate change as class war. So far, UP and academia more broadly, I think, has not been that good, or at least those who work on environmental issues within academia, I should say. So far we have not been that good at incorporating work and labor into our analysis of socio-environmental metabolism. And to do this, we seriously need to engage with Stefania Barca's definition of work as a gendered and racialized mediator of socio-environmental metabolism. Why do I argue it's a very important task? Because if we accept that growth and the expansion of capitalism dependent on unequal global ecological exchanges, then we need to take seriously into account that these uneven exchanges are not only unequal transfers of matter, of land, of water, of sun, energy, embodied in agricultural products or goods we consume. These unequal transfers are also unequal transfers of labor, of human and animal labor embodied in the food we eat, the materials we consume, from beans and berries to cars and phones and construction materials. These unequal transfers of labor need to be calculated into the global solidary exchanges that we presumably want to achieve. This is work that just started in earnest by a number of scholars I already mentioned Hubert, Barca, Allison, Neville, Seymour, and Warren are other scholars who work on these issues. The second suggestion for debunking this false dilemma of saving the planet versus increasing well-being is to focus on the production and reproduction side of things, not only on consumer behaviors. All of the current operationalized solutions offered against climate change are not real alternatives. Circular economies, smart cities are consumption-level management solutions. So if we focus on the production and reproduction side of things, then we can start asking, what use values do we want to keep in our economy? Which ones do we want to destroy? What does a solitary economy that destroys the things that destroy the planet do? Holgersson and Verlernius call for the destruction of the infrastructures of fossil capital, of coal plants and oil platforms. This is very important, but it's not enough. We should go further. We need to seriously examine infrastructures of financial capital, which vampire-like feed on livelihoods and environments across the globe. It is financial funds that drive tar sand oil extraction only for speculative purposes. They destroy landscapes only to float the venue on the stock market and abandon it like this. It is financialized mortgage funds that draw millions of livelihoods into real estate speculative practices, making us all collectively invest in making housing unaffordable for future generations. Financial investment funds speculating over the colonization of space are already making the carbon footprint of communications 30 times higher. These hegemonic practices of financial capital are deeply inscribed into spatial practices already. So to go beyond, we need to create counter-hegemonic spatial imaginaries and practices that can accommodate an economy of non-destructive use values. So the third suggestion I want to propose is to start seriously and systematically reimagining and prefiguring what new types of spatialities, what new forms of urbanization would a use value economy that does not destroy the planet demand. Remember, 19th century workers' uprisings demanded demolition, destruction of factories, of tearing up slums in order to start anew, to create more equal housing, living, and working conditions. Our imaginaries for the future that, in order to become meaningful, always need to be inscribed in space. So our demands today do not have to be about demolition. They could be about a repair kind of urbanity, a solidary urbanity that starts with prefiguring and reimagining new use values for what Sieverts calls the in-between city. And this is not some kind of utopian call, it's already happening. And let me give you some examples of how it's happening. Example one, this comes from a project we completed last year with Haralabos Savdaroglu on refugee housing in Greece, Turkey, and Serbia. And imagine, here is what, it's a kind of infrastructure activism that refugees do here. As many of us in Greece know, many refugees re-inhabit dilapidated urban infrastructures across Europe and create new forms of co-housing. This is what refugees did in Belgrade, in Athens, and Istanbul after 2016. They enacted a form of repair urbanity for these sites that nobody actually cared for, because the rent gap in those sites was not big enough to give them over to real estate development. However, these commoning and co-housing practices have all been evicted already. This is just 1 year after we finished the project, since in the name of urban renewal and real estate speculation, they've been torn down in order to rebuild. The rent gap became sufficient for redevelopment. So imagine if we were to embrace the way refugees re-inhabit these dilapidated urban infrastructures and in-between spaces and institutionalize them as valid and supported housing practices. Here's another example of what infrastructure activism does in Ljubljana, in this case. This is the Krater Collective, who turned what some would consider no man's land, a brownfield site in the middle of the city, into a space that it's for living and encountering for humans and more than humans. This is also what we have been doing with Deborah Solomon, who is a soil artist and PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. This is what we've been doing in Amsterdam for the last 5 years. This is a site in Amsterdam Southeast, a social housing site with iconic modernist, it's called Belmeer. It's an iconic modernist landscape with this actually beautiful, in my view, high-rise buildings, and these in-between green spaces that are patches of green that nobody pays any attention to, nobody cares for. So Deborah Solomon has been working for 4 years on this site, and together with local inhabitants, humans and more than humans, she fought for reconfiguring how we manage urban greens. She fought for reconfiguring the management regime of urban greens within the municipality to stop just mowing these spaces. And the result was that these monocultural splashes of green amongst concrete blocks became use value spaces that produce food for people. You see here on the right, the change. Become use value spaces for not only for people, for insects, for birds, spaces for meaningful encounters amongst humans and the biophysical world. And the final point I want to make in terms of how we can debunk this false dilemma of saving the planet versus saving jobs and improving livelihoods, is that if we want to start prefiguring an economy of meaningful use values, then we, geographers, planners, social scientists, cannot do it alone. We need to engage not only with communities, most of us do engage with communities, but also we need to engage with the biophysical world. We need to engage with engineers, with scientists, ecologists, geologists, medics, designers and architects. And it's a difficult task, but we do need to stick with it, and we do need to stay with the trouble. And the trouble means not only being critical of technocratic solutions, not only being innovative with our concepts, epistemologies, and ontologies, but also trying to prefigure and start prefiguring and reimagining these new specialities for a use value solidary economy. This, in my view, is the most urgent task for all social scientists at this moment, to go beyond navel gazing and to strive and remain central and relevant to the politics of climate change. And I will stop here. Thank you. I'll stop sharing, and yeah, I can't hear you at the moment, so. I cannot hear anything from you at this moment. Now again, yeah.
Okay, Maria, can you hear us? Good.
Yes, yeah.
So if there is anyone for a comment or question, clarification, blah, blah. So no one? No. Yeah. Have you considered loud? Speak up because you can only hear.
Maybe Evangelia can say it again, because I don't think I can hear, but let's try.
Hello. Have you considered your study assignment, the Ελληνικό project, and how they promoted us the first 50 minutes cities and so on, while at the same time it creates a concrete and barrier between the city of Athens, and the traditional relation that has with the seashore. Eventually, what they do is privatizing the seashore, and how the city the citizens relate with the sea. And
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a very good example. I personally have not studied that particular case study of the Ελληνικό, but other scholars have done a very excellent work on it. Some actually graduated, I think, working with Kostis and Dina and Lois too. I'm not sure, but to directly answer your question, yes, this is that space was a unique opportunity of turning of a in-between space that could potentially have become the urban commons, and could potentially have hosted all these interesting interactions that we saw happen in Ljubljana or in Amsterdam. There were, to my small knowledge of this particular case, there had been serious attempts by communities and citizens to claim this space, and they were evicted in the end. So yes, what we are left with is the exact opposite of a use values based, a meaningful use value space. It's a privatized space in effect that you say. So for me, the key question there for the Ελληνικό case study is, why did we collectively fail to claim that space as a meaningful urban space for Athens? I don't have an answer, but if any of you is more engaged with it and know better the history of it, and I know I mean, it's not a singular answer, but if I can bring the insight of what we've been doing in Amsterdam and how that worked, is that the activists there engage with the institutions right from the start. They're not opposing with institutions in the beginning. They don't see like planning authorities or the state at all levels. They don't see them as the enemy necessarily right from the start. But they try to bring them in right from the beginning. And to me, that was that looked. It's a different way of doing it, of doing activism. But I learned a lot from it, because it actually pays off in a way, in a sense, because in the case of Amsterdam and this high-rise building, the Belmere neighborhood I was talking about, it was a 5-year fight, a serious fight with lots of conflict between Deborah Solomon, my PhD student, and the municipality of Amsterdam to actually turn this space into a meaningful and commoning space. And it was a so Deborah took over all the community of local residents, and the fight was between them and the institutions. It was not between them, and so that was before any private capital came in to claim this space. So the claiming was channeled of the space was channeled through institutional frameworks. I don't know if we have, maybe you in the audience would be interesting to see if we have cases in Greece that this has happened in that way. and to compare. It would be really useful and interesting to compare, I think, how activism works in terms of institutionalizing its claims. Yeah, it's a big question, but anyway. Yeah.
Κάποιος άλλος, άλλη?
If you want to make a comment, there is a case of this alternative approach of how to organize activism claims. And well, there are many cases in different areas, but concerning urban spaces, there's the case of this, Karatasu. So
I guess.
They have created, you know, a whole system there of governance.
Indeed,
and yeah. Case, because there is a law of treaties in the 80s, I don't know if you know this story.
Yeah.
That allows to have
councils.
At the level of the neighborhood. So they have passed this through the administration of, you know, this case for a small part which is in Thessaloniki.
Yes.
So you see these alternative approaches are around us, but there are other domains than urban spaces, which is more difficult maybe, or that they have found their ways to, you know, introduce new practices. Let's say, yeah. Strong practice, but also positive. I mean,
yeah, that's a very good example. Yes, yes. And Maria, what's her name? Maria, she, from University of Thessaloniki, she's done her PhD on this. Very, very good work on the Karatasu. And indeed, this is very, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it will be interesting to compare these cases and see what works and what doesn't work. Yeah.
Άλλο σχόλιο, ερώτηση.
Okay, thank you. I also have a question. Well, this is very inspiring, at least for me, because I come from different backgrounds. So you mentioned about this. I will go back to the example from the city of Amsterdam. And you mentioned that with this co-created new space, you actually somehow the values that were, the use values that were produced from this space were transformed in a sense. And my question, I'm more involved with what we call the non-use values work. So I'm trying to understand, because you mentioned activism, you mentioned how good this was for everyone. So has there been an attempt to highlight the fact that there are also non-use values produced out of such a co-created space?
Yeah, what do you mean by non-use values in this context?
Yeah, actually my original question was, what do you mean by use values as well? Because from my perspective, at least I'm talking about the terminology that is used by the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So within this context, use values are really instrumental values, values which relate to job creation or to monetary benefits, or the fact that somebody has access to a house, for example, so something that is tangible. But non-use values refer to the fact that you can have, you feel nice being in nature and really working on the garden, and this is shared for many people, and it can create the sense of community. But at the same time, within a city, this has an added value of regulating soil erosion and climate, which is something you don't see, but it's what nature does, and it's good for you.
Yeah.
So this is what we call in this group of literature the non-use values. So yeah. Is this something that you look from this holistic perspective, or is it really directed to the use values, at least in my sense of defining these?
Yes, thank you. This is a very important question. Thank you for this. So I stay, or I hope I stay, or wish to stay within the Marxist framework of analysis. I didn't talk about I talked about meaningful use values. So what kind of use values, we create use value, everything has a use value, almost everything. Definitely every commodity produced has a use value and an exchange value. And what I argued is to think and prefigure what kind of use values do we want to keep producing with the labor and the resources we have, and what use values we find are unnecessary and destructive, and stop producing, keep on consuming and producing those. So we need 100 smartphones, we need e-cars, we need, so it's at a very fundamental level of what use values do we continue to produce that do not destroy the planet. And which one, and more importantly, which ones do we want to destroy, to stop producing, because we find them not meaningful for a solidary economy. Now, the concept of non-use values I find very problematic. Well, I find problematic, particularly within the context of a global, international institutions who, at the same time, promote the understanding of nature as an economic exchange value. So it's so far, at least, it's been all about monetizing the ecosystem services. So viewing nature as ecosystem services, putting a price tag on the ecosystem, on the air we breathe, on the water and the clean water, in order to save it. The whole of the EU environmental policy was based on this concept of ecosystem services, nature as ecosystem services, and monetizing nature in order to protect it. So I find it difficult to grapple with what is a non-use value.
But okay.
I'm sorry. These intangible processes that we feel or breathe, or when we engage with nature, this is a kind of, if you want to stay within the Marxist framework of analysis, this is labor that we put into nature. When we garden, we put labor in nature. We engage with nature. We produce something. We produce a flower. We produce a vegetable, whatever. This is still nature, and we still produce a use value. And you can view the beauty of a flower, or the engagement with the nature as a kind of use value. The non-use value, I would be interested to have this conversation at length with another, if you want. I would be very interested to. Yeah.
Great.
Sorry, but also, do you mean non-exchange value, for example? What is that?
It's also about the epistemology and ontological framings that we all use, and they are different.
Stuff.
Exactly.
But I would love to have this conversation with you and with other. If you just email me and we can, thanks.
I just wanted to comment a little more on the first question, because I think it is very interesting regarding the Ellinikon. I think that obviously the history of Ellinikon is huge, and I don't think that personally I am the one who can give more information. But I think that the interesting part of the question is this contradiction between a large investment that has all the privatization and bad things that we can all agree, and a new kind of promotion that is becoming more and more, dominant in the discussion right now, that there is going to be created a new way of life closer to the nature, and a new neighborhood. So this discussion, I think that this was what you were trying to mention. And even though it seems very funny for people like us, I have to say that today it was the first time that I met someone who knew someone who has bought a house in Ellinikon. And I was always wondering who is buying these houses with these extreme prices, because it's something like 1 million euros, an apartment of 150 square meters. So that it's extremely expensive. And I asked him why this guy bought something there. And what he answered me is very interesting. He told me that he bought there because when he's getting old, I'm not sure if he's living in Greece right now or outside, but when he gets old, he wants to come and stay closer to the sea, to the nature, which for me, it's funny. I mean, I am expecting them to have these casinos and these towers, etc. So what I'm saying is that there is a discussion now, at least for some parts of the society that can afford this houses, because for us it's extreme. I mean, that there is an opportunity there to create a new city in that in Athens you cannot have it somewhere else. That you are closer to the nature and you can be closer to your community, and all this discussion about these values. So I think that you would like to comment on that, because it's very interesting how this, you know, how these notions of community and nature is becoming the opposite. In a gated community like Ellinikon will be. And I think I'm not trying to say, but I think that this was the idea of the question in the beginning, and or personally, I think it's an interesting part of it.
Yes, yes. Thank you. It's a very interesting discussion. Of course, the case of Ellinikon, this kind of privatized way of experiencing being close to nature. We may not have that many examples of that in Greece, but you know, it's spread across the world, in place Australia, across the world. United Arab Emirates, Australia, Latin America, America, the whole of suburban America. There was this beautiful film many years ago, La Zona, I think it was Latin American, which depicted this. So this privatized way of experiencing nature is the driver of all these sustainable green urban developments. And it is a way of experiencing nature as this exclusive object that you possess, you can buy if you have a high enough income, and then you can consume. There's the exchange value of nature and enjoy. So it's nature sold as exchange value and as added value onto the real estate market. And that is precisely the problem. So the problem is not as such the redevelopment of Ellinikon, because something had to be done with this space, obviously. But the problem is what kind of capital comes in through this redevelopment, and what it does to the city as a whole, and to the city as a whole includes the environment, includes the relation to the waterfront and how citizens engage with that. If you create a whole zone that blocks citizens from entering that area, you create a privatized space. And also, basically, this project is a call, a wide cry from the part of Athens to international capital to say, hey, come and exploit us, come and exploit the nature, come and exploit the waterfront, come and exploit the city. It's a call for international real estate developers to invest, and for international elites to come and have it as a second home. And we have seen very well it's a kind of Disneyification of the landscape. And we've seen very clearly what this kind of policies have done to places like London. If you go to the London city center today, it's like a ghost town, because there are no real inhabitants. All of the London city center is inhabited by this multi-millionaire global elites. In a way, the soul is taken out of the city. And that is, to me, the real problem. Beyond the engagement with the environment. But it all starts with the natural beauty, of course, if you wish, a certain depiction of what a naturally beautiful environment is, the waterfront that is attractive and all that. And also, in addition, it's multiple. It's like domino effect. So it does multiple things. By attracting this international capital in Athens, it affects the whole of the housing market in Athens. Of course, people in this audience know this better than I do. So it's multiple effects, and all in the name of living closer to nature or to a kind of idyllic environment for a few.
Do we have time for one more comment, question? So,
just one quick question, not totally unrelated to a discussion. Might you happen to know if wild camping is free in the Netherlands? Because it's not in Greece.
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know, but I do know that all of my colleagues and friends are very much into it. So
Probably is.
yeah, I would assume it. I can't answer it because I really don't know, but I know that many people do it, and it's a way of engaging with nature, with the environment, without the interference of exchange, of monetary exchange.
And in Greece, it's strictly forbidden.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But in Greece, also many of the people who do it for the same reason and do it illegally, of course, but it still happens. But so the logic is the same, but I would assume it's, yeah, I don't know, but I will check it actually. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Okay, can I say also something? Okay, Maria, thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for all the questions as well. It was wonderful.
Very interesting. I really like the two cycles that you underlined, the cycles of growth and decline, and the cycles of destruction of ecological, socio-ecological destruction. That goes hand in hand, and not only locally, but globally as well, as you very well you had described. And I took the 4 points that you underline at the end as a kind of call of reimagining those 4 issues.
Yeah.
Because the materialization and putting them in place requires a lot of different struggles at different scales and different levels. But at least reimagining the global unequal exchange in terms of ecology, it's something very important. And of course, so far it's dominated by consuming and consumerism, like, let's say, alternative trade, or don't buy, let's say, food that has traveled a lot of miles, etc. But we think beyond that, and the unequal ecological exchange between different places, I think it's a very important issue, and it has been developed by many political ecologists. I fully appreciate that. And I will ask also for a more, let's say, careful choice of different local experience, because you use the example of the best hotel in Europe, but that was not, let's say, a refugees initiative. It was a very well organized occupation by activists, and then, of course, the refugees came. But I think your last point in terms of engaging with communities and introducing the activists and power in place and how activists have been related with institutions, it's something very important.
Mm.
And I like to underline that, and your example from Amsterdam, it's very useful. And I think this is something that we have to learn here in Greece, because many times activists don't like to talk with institutions, and I think this is a very, very important question. Okay, thanks a lot, Maria.
Thank you all. Wonderful questions and engagement. Can I stay mute?
Next time we hope to see you in person.
Yes, it was a difficult moment for me because of family things.
Technicalities in the beginning.
I'm very sorry I couldn't be there. I'm missing a lot. But yeah, next time face to face. I'm very sorry. Can I stay muted and without a picture to listen also to Eric or not?
Yes. I don't
Sorry, what?
Stay connected. I will try.
Okay, if not, okay, but it would be nice if I would like to hear. Yeah, I will switch off my camera and my microphone. Thank you all. Thank you.